My name is Alison McTavish. I'm one of the GPs at Douglas Medical Centre.
And I'm Kira Drummond. I'm another of the GPs at Douglas Medical Centre.
And we also have with us tonight Lee Vaughan, who is a lived experience pain advocate who also delivers pain education to healthcare professionals. And actually, Dr. Drummond and I met him on a pain education course. And we're delighted you could join us, Lee. I'm not quite sure where you are, but we'll hear from you shortly. So we'd also like to thank Dr. Barbara Phipps, who's a GP in Edinburgh, who has been running chronic pain group consultations really successfully there, and she's very kindly allowed us the use of her slides this evening. So what we plan to cover this evening is why we need pain, what is the purpose of it, and we'll hear from Lee. We'll discuss some amazing pain stories. We'll give an overview of the pain management programme that we're setting up and give you more details about that. Unfortunately, we can't answer any questions this evening, so we've disabled the chat, but if you do have any questions arising from tonight, if you get in touch with the surgery in the usual way. So the first thing that we'd really like to stress is that your pain is absolutely real. Nobody is suggesting for a minute that your pain is imagined or in your head. It's just there's quite a lot of new science around pain, and we understand pain a lot better than we did before. Often patients tell us that they feel that they've not been listened to or not taken seriously. And if that's ever been the case, I can only apologise. The other thing we really want to stress is that your pain is not your fault. But the third and hopeful thing is that we do believe that your pain can get better. So what is pain? It's defined as an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience associated with or resembling that associated with actual or potential tissue damage. And what do we need it for? So the answer to that is pain is there to protect us from harm, and it's really important. It's a warning alarm that our brain turns on when it perceives there's some threat to our health or our well-being. There are two types of pain. Acute pain, which is usually short-lived and is response to injury infection, and it usually goes away completely. And then you have chronic pain, which is persistent and often lasts that lasts for more than 3 months, and often, as I'm sure a lot of you know, an awful lot longer than that. So if you imagine if I stuck my hand on a hot plate, the pain receptors in my hand would start sending messages up to my brain so that my brain can do something about it. So my brain tells me to take my hand away by sounding the danger alarm that I'm causing myself damage. So it's really there to protect me. But the other thing is the brain also stores that information in my memory, so I don't do it again. So it's not just protecting me at the time, but it's also protecting me in the future. So how we used to believe pain worked was that a physical injury or infection stimulated the pain receptors, which relayed that information up to our brain, and tissue damage meant pain, and the more tissue damage there was, the more pain that you would have. But that doesn't really explain all situations. So this photograph here is from quite a famous case where a construction worker jumped off a scaffolding and onto this very large nail which went straight through his foot. He was in extreme pain, and he got an ambulance up to A&E. He required quite a large amount of pain relief intravenously, but actually when they took his boot off, his foot was completely undamaged. That nail had gone in between his toes, so he had actually not any tissue injury at all, but just the sight of what had happened made his brain set off his pain alarm. I'm sure many of you have heard of people who have phantom limb pain. So even though the diseased part of their body has been removed, they continue to have pain in that area. We hear of people in battle who sustain really serious injuries but actually are completely unaware of any pain until they get to safety. We sometimes see pain where there's no actual tissue damage in fibromyalgia, which is, can be really extreme pain. Pain often gets worse with stress, and we also often see long-term pain that persists long after the original injury has healed. So we're going to play a short video now. It's just a wee 5-minute video, and then after that we'll hear from Lee. So stay with us. I hope you find this helpful.
Once upon a time, all the lands were fraught with persistent pain. So widespread was this affliction that 1 in 4 people experienced it. The pain lasted for more than 3 months. It shadowed their daily lives, held them back from everyday activities, and the interventions they tried proved useless. Hey, pain, go away, we've tried it all, but still you stay. Moving less, taking pills, knives and needles, and still we're sore. We can't take no more, no more. But the pain remains like a loyal companion. The people's hopes faded, and they became resigned to living with the pain. Only now the pain was a beast. Then along came a group of researchers, of which I am one. Back off, big fella. I'm Professor Lorimer Moseley, and I'm a pain scientist. Pain scientists are starting to think differently about pain and its causes, and we're making exciting discoveries, like how the way you think about your pain can change the way it feels. Over the next few minutes, I'll help you to understand your pain. Understanding is important because it can change how much things hurt and how much your body can do, and it can help you to tame the beast. First, trust me about this. Pain is not an accurate measure of tissue health. Pain is a protector. By making unpleasant feelings, your brain changes your behaviour so you can avoid injury or your tissues can heal. Sometimes pain is not helpful, like phantom limb pain. You don't expect a missing limb to ache, but it does, and the pain is very real. So how do we explain this? Well, pain is a warning signal from your brain that depends on credible evidence to say your body needs protecting. Sometimes pain's too protective and you get unnecessary warning signals. Pain scientists now understand that there are many ways our nervous system ends up producing unnecessary warning signals. Take conditioning, for example. You think of Pavlov's dog. Every time food was offered, Pavlov rang a bell. Of course, the dog would salivate seeing the food. This went on for a while. Eventually, the dog was conditioned to salivate for the bell alone. Well, conditioning is just one of the ways your body learns pain. And the longer your nervous system produces pain, the better it gets at producing it. Your body learns pain. So what feeds this beast? Well, let's look at how pain works. In your body's tissues, there are specific neurons, which normally only respond to harmful stimuli, whether mechanical, chemical, or thermal. When they are activated, they send a warning signal to your spinal cord, which can in turn send a signal to your brain. This activity in neurons is called nociception, and it's happening all the time, but only sometimes results in pain. Most of the time, the brain protects you with other things, like movement. Once the warning signal reaches the brain makes sense of it based on the information arriving and a vast amount of information already stored. If there's good reason to think protection is required, then your brain makes pain. One of our amazing discoveries is that you can have pain without any physical stimuli. Thoughts and places might activate the warning signals, and the pain feels exactly the same. But it's not just your brain. Your spinal cord also learns how to generate unnecessary warning signals. So how do you know when your nervous system is learning pain? You may notice your pain spreads or comes on without warning. Your body feels odd and it's hard to move properly. Your pain changes quickly with your mood, and small annoyances can set it off. Old injuries start to hurt again. You're more sensitive to stimuli, and the longer the pain goes on, the more all of this occurs. The old way we understood pain could not explain these things and left many sufferers feeling like no one believed it was real, or for it to hurt so badly, there must be a major tissue problem. But we now know how persistent pain happens. So how can you tame the beast? Pain is a very personal thing. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. And while you probably have well thought out coping strategies, it's time to take a new approach to dealing with and reducing your pain, one that focuses on retraining your pain system. This might mean testing yourself physically and moving more than you normally would. Being honest about your current attitudes and beliefs can also help, as can asking your health professional new questions.
How do I know if my pain system is being overprotective?
How do I retrain my pain system to be less protective?
How do I know if I'm safe to move?
So be brave and have hope, because it is possible to tame the beast. Visit our website for more information and questions to ask your health professional. tamethebeast.org.
Okay, Lee, are you there?
I'm certainly here, yes. And I will
Fantastic.
hopefully try and share my screen. Is that coming through, Alison?
It looks perfect. Thank you. I'm
It
so
looks
delighted to
perfect.
see you, Lee.
I got here eventually. I'll explain later what was going on. But yeah, thanks for a lovely introduction and some really good information sort of coming through in that first bit. And I think what I'd sort of impress on people is that some of this stuff can be a little odd to hear at first. It can feel a little wrong, but the messages at the beginning are, your pain is real, you're not alone, and we do believe you. And we have these messages now because we're beginning to understand how long-term pain, chronic pain starts to work and how it develops. And I mean, I'm really sort of privileged and honored to be asked to come and do this. And I sort of speak these days as to the very thing that's held me back for such a long time. I now try to use as my greatest asset in providing pain education to GPs, to healthcare professionals, and to people living with pain. I'd love to get into schools and start working there as well to get these messages across, because we're starting to learn that we need to change the way we think about, the way we talk about, and the way we treat persistent pain. So who am I? Well, I'm the guy on the bike. My name's Lee, and Lee Vaughan, and I'm from way down in what this evening is sunny Sheffield. And I suppose what you describe me, I think you describe me as just your typical 50-odd-year-old Yorkshireman. We're all pretty much the same, aren't we? I enjoy hot bubble baths with scented candles and plinky plunky music. I enjoy mindfulness and visualizations and sort of meditations. I also enjoy stretching and doing bits of yoga that suit me as well. I like to relax, I like to unwind, and I like that bit of alone time as well. And most importantly for me, is finding me in nature. I love being in nature. It's such an important part. But I suppose why? What's the most important fact that brings me today is the why. So we've established my name's Lee. I'm actually 51 now. That's a slightly old slide. So my background is that I've lived with persistent pain for over 34 years now. So that's that pain that began in my mid to late teens. And it was pain that never really had an answer. And at my worst, I was seeing my GP or healthcare professional 2 to 3 times a month. So 30 to 40 times a year. And I was searching for that fix, because that's the way we're programmed. We want doctors, we want healthcare professionals to fix us, because that's what they do, isn't it? That's what we're told. Doctor will fix you. But for me, in January 2022, cutting a very long story short, I was finally signed off work, long-term sick. I was 47 years old, and I was staring down the barrel of ill health, retirement. I tendered my resignation, and I thought my working life was over. I was in the worst pain of my life, and in one of the darkest places of my life. And I was taking 28 tablets every single day. And that was the condition I was in. I already said I'd concluded my working life was over at 47. But for me now, upon reflection, I firmly believe, in fact, no, I know, I know those 28 tablets, they were clouding my thinking. They were blocking my way forward. They'd made me a different person. And when I look back now, it's being on that much medication is like being sat in a car on a really cold, frosty morning, and that windscreen's frozen solid, frozen over, and you can't see. Well, for me, starting to change that relationship with medication was like hitting the DMS button. You know, once I started to work my way down and away from tablets and look at alternatives, then the windscreen simply began to clear. But back then, you know, pain wasn't just pain. It came with depression, it came with anxiety, weight gain, low mobility, and a total loss in quality of life. I wasn't the guy I aspired to be, and I certainly wasn't recognizable as a husband or as a father. I was overwhelmed, and I was disengaged. I was at the end of my tether. In March 2022, a pain management program changed all this, very similar to what the team are trying here. And a lot of people will say to me, how did it change that? But I think the most important reason is why did it change? Not necessarily how. I think the why comes before the how. You know, they didn't give me a new magical pill, or they didn't recommend some revolutionary surgery. What they did is they made me curious. They made me challenge the way I thought, the way I felt, and my beliefs. You know, that's 47 years of beliefs and understanding. And with that curiosity came just a little bit of hope. And I think for many people living with pain, when it's really bad, the one thing we need is a little bit of hope. We just need a little bit of hope that there can be a better place for us. And that curiosity and hope, well, that encouraged self-learning, you know, and being at a pain management program, I describe that as finding my tribe. I sat amongst a group of people. I started to find people who understood me and understood me without judgment. They walked in my shoes. They know how it feels. They know how isolating it is. They know how hopeless it feels. And finding my tribe, as I describe it, was one of the biggest influences on changing the direction of my life. Because what I learned was that pain was not what I thought it was or what I'd been told it was. It completely challenged everything I'd ever known and my family and my friends. Okay. But it made me curious. I wanted to understand little things that were starting to happen and little patterns that I was finding in life. And with increasing knowledge came acceptance, control, clarity, and that hope. My activation shifted towards me taking responsibility for myself, taking responsibility for that journey, and coming away from this medical lens of the doctor will fix me. And on that journey of self-reflection, self-discovery, I always share this slide, and feel free to go look up this podcast, because for me, it's one of the best podcasts I've ever heard. And within this podcast, I heard a sentence that changed the course of my life. Possibly would not be sat here talking to you tonight had I not heard it. And it's a series of podcasts by Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, and I believe it's number 310, How to Heal Chronic Pain with Dr. Howard Schubiner. And these names are highly influential people, along with Lorimer Moseley, in the world of pain science. And as I said, I was out on a walk one day, and I was listening to this podcast. I was wanting to learn. I wanted to learn about pain. I wanted to learn about my pain and searching for answers. And I heard one sentence that stopped me in my track. I can remember where I was. I can remember the weather. I can pretty much remember what I was wearing. This is the crucial bit, and I will explain it as simplistically as I can, but it made sense to me. And Howard Schubiner explains in this podcast that physical trauma and emotional trauma share the same neural pathways in our brains. Trying to make that simple as I needed it to be for me is we imagine that when pain messages are being communicated through our body, imagine that when we break our leg, the signal go to our brain and they travel down the M1 of your pain pathways. So it's the M1 is your neural pathway. However, when you also suffer an emotional trauma, That can be grief, it can be loss, it can be bullying, it can be anything. The messages travel exactly the same pathway. So an emotional trauma can share the same pathway as a physical trauma. Therefore, your brain and your nervous system can respond to emotional trauma by creating an experience of pain. I knew in an instant that was me, because I knew my story. I know my history. I know my life. And I know that I've never had any answers. But for the first time in 30 years, my pain just made sense. Because everything that had gone on in my life, it tied in with pain. Pain starting at a time when there seemed to be no symptoms, but there was a lot of stress and a lot of problems going on. And I also started to recognize that my pain in the present was responding to emotions. Very few people's pain gets any better when they're angry, they're frustrated, or they're furious, or they're full of rage. But often, if we look for those moments when we're happy with our children or the grandchildren, or sat in the back garden, or when the sun comes out, often the volume of that pain just goes down a little bit. At our early stages, it tends to pass us by a little quickly. And I would encourage everyone who's sort of listening to that is to, if you know where those moments are, can you make them any bigger? If you don't spot those moments, if you think it's there all the time, maybe just try to spend some time as to, do I spot when the pain maybe just dips away slightly and what I'm doing? And again, the podcast there is Unlearn Your Pain by Howard Schubiner. So for me, things were now starting to make sense. With that line, things were beginning to become clear. 30 years of pain driven by fragmented emotion, trauma, and grief. I was a shattered jigsaw puzzle. And life had done this. I didn't choose it. Life did this. Medication was never going to solve this puzzle, because there was a much bigger picture that required time and it required understanding. And as we've just heard, there are two types of pain, but I explain it slightly differently, because I would say that there's pain that hurts you and there's pain that changes you. And persistent pain, long-term pain, with both. More importantly, it changes you. However, had someone simply taken time to listen to my story, my journey, and to my feelings, would they have seen the pieces which formulated the signs and symptoms of what Lorimer Moseley has just described as an overprotective brain? My brain creating pain, and I didn't necessarily need it, but my brain was just being overprotective and responding to emotional stimulus. And the things that change was, and the way I sort of try and say this to people is, changes, lifestyle and behavior change is an inside job. It's for us to pursue. It's for us to take that control. And today the picture isn't 100% perfect, but whose life ever is? What's normal? There'll always be bumps in the road, but I know where the pieces fit now, and I know how to look to find them, even if at times things can begin to fall apart. I've learned to understand pain, but I've learned to understand my own pain and the link between emotions and physical pain. And even where we have what we perceive as reasons for our pain, be that rheumatoid arthritis, osteoarthritis, we might have irritable bowel disease, or all these kind of things that get thrown into this complex umbrella of pain is, if we have rheumatoid arthritis, imagine the old hi-fi players that we used to have with the CDs. And, your rheumatoid arthritis is the CD going into that hi-fi system. Now, without the CD, there's going to be no output. There's going to be no noise at all. So we need a little bit of input somewhere along the line. But the volume of pain that you experience is generated by the graphic equalizers, the volume button, the bass and the treble and the equalizer. And that those equalizers are determined by emotional stimulus, whether we're angry, whether we're fearful, whether we're grieving, whether we're hurt, whether we're lonely. They can also be driven by social stimulus, worries about money, worries about our job, paying the mortgage, interviews for personal independence payments and benefit systems. These things all irritate our central nervous system, and that in turn can serve to turn up the level of pain we experience. Because often in persistent pain, we're experiencing pain that just really shouldn't be as much as it is. And I've been there. I get that. But my deep understanding of pain and how it impacts people enables me now to help others find their missing pieces of part of community groups, peer support groups, and not online support groups as well. I'm now working as a lived experience health coach. I work with people living with long-term pain, trying to help them live a better life. I'm teaching people in healthcare about pain from the patient's perspective, the person who lives with pain, the real expert. Yeah. Not providing answers though with people I work with as a coach, just walking alongside them, creating curiosity and generating hope. And I've been told in some of the cafes that I host and the groups that I talk to that nobody's ever explained pain to me like you do. Where do I start? And that's the value of people who are living with conditions have when they come together and they can be that the force of nature. We can really, really help each other with sharing our experiences. Because very often with persistent pain, it isn't there to be seen. It's not often there on x-rays. It's not often there on MRIs or in your blood. And I'm not sort of saying everybody shares my story. But if I share the story and I tell people that, my life has been littered with traumas, people tend to nod along and have an acceptance of, yeah, that kind of makes sense. And if physical pain can be created by our previous emotional traumas, and we're not going to find it until it's heard. And for it to be heard, we need a different way of looking at things. I suppose what changed when and why? Well, that's 3 decades of thoughts, beliefs, and behavior. That can't be untangled in an instant. I'm a fisherman. I'm used to really bad knots because I'm shocking at it. But the toughest of knots take time and they take perseverance. We can't undo 30 years of hurt in an instant. But things for me changed when I was given the right information. Given it at the right time and given it in the right way. And this can be provided once we've established, time and a safe space just to hear a person's story and to hear the journey. And very often in telling our stories, it happened for me. The very first time I told my whole story to a healthcare professional, it was the first time I heard it too. And that is really deep and meaningful thing to say, but it was. I started hearing things I didn't realize was sat there. Chronic pain is complex. It creates overwhelm. It creates disengagement. We just want to be fixed. We just want someone to take this pain away. And hearing some of the information and guidance on pain management programs and what you may hear tonight won't be easy at first, but when we sow seeds, we don't expect instant germination. It takes time. We just must keep sowing seeds. And they'll only sow if we plant them. And healthcare professionals at my pain program provided me with the right information in a relatively short space of time. Some of it was very, very new. You're hearing some of it now. And some of it was really difficult to hear as well. But it all made me curious. And curiosity was why things changed. I wanted to learn. I wanted to know more. How can my pain react to being angry but disappear a little when I feel happy or I'm having a nice time with the kids? How can that work? Then I wanted to understand pain. And the when, well, that happened gradually over time as I gathered evidence of my brain being overprotective. And it still continues today. It's not a journey. It's a journey. It's not a race. The slower we take it, the quicker we often get there, and you don't need to have a finish line. That's a difficult word there, and we're talking about acceptance. This is not something you have to learn to live with. It's something we can learn to use as a protection system. And once we can learn to use pain as a protector, we tend to fear it less. And my journey now today, I take 1 tablet a day, and I haven't seen my GP for 3 years. And that is a huge transformation. And that is simply through taking an holistic way of looking at pain. It's all right for life to be unpredictable and uncertain. In fact, you know what? It helps. We don't make mistakes. We just create opportunities to learn. What changed? Well, I did. And that's the key point. The shift to what we call an internal locus of control. Yeah, I had guides along the way. I had people supporting me, but nobody ran the race for me. I had to run the race myself. And I suppose that brings us to the how. And for me, the how was education. It was understanding pain. And the other one is finding that peer support, finding that tribe, finding those people that understand me. in a collective where we can support and we can help each other. You know, I was once told with my spine, because of the disc degeneration you have, Lee, you should never ride a bike, never ride a bike. And in October 23, I cycled the UK coast to coast with 4 people who also live with pain. And we raised just over £3,000 for charity, Pain Concern up in Scotland. And today I'm working as a pain educator. I'm educating GPs and healthcare professionals. I work as a health coach with the NHS. And I also host a Facebook group, which is nearly 700 people strong, where people share their experiences, their strategies with a positive narrative. There's no doom and gloom in this group. There's enough doom and gloom with pain. We wanted a positive group, and we've got a positive group. And this year I managed to secure money to launch a website, 100% designed and built by people who live with persistent pain. And if you go onto Google and search for Partnering Pain, and I'll try and show you something in a moment, you'll find us. And for me, you know, I can no longer aspire to be pain-free. This is a really weird one now, and it's a good job you can't throw things at me through the screen, really, but I see pain as my friend, the friend that watches over me, and it sends me important messages when it thinks I need them. You know, sometimes it makes mistakes, but that's okay. It's a chance to reframe the experience and turn it into a positive. You know, at our worst, the one thing we need is hope, and hope comes from curiosity, and we get that curiosity with an open mind. But since January 22, and I'm going to wrap up now, this is the group that I set up, Partnering Pain. We're on Facebook. You're welcome to join us, and you're going to hear more about what I've been talking about tonight. It's not about medicines and surgeries. It's about, right, what else can we do to change our relationship with pain? This was the weekend I rode around Britain with Flipping Pain, an organisation in the northeast of England. And on that tour was Lorimer Mosley, the guy who did the video at the beginning. Not long after that, with my friend Greg, who's got a spinal stimulator fitted, we cycled London to Brighton. And then October 23, we did the coast to coast ride. I'm now working up and down the country with Flipping Pain. I'm now back doing the things I love and I enjoy and are valuable to me, fishing. And I also set up community groups in Sheffield where we have aquatic water groups where people can just come, join, be together in warm water and do bits of exercise. You know, the value of peer support is huge. And ultimately, my journey has now led to me speaking at national conferences, you know, standing up for us, sharing our voices and our concerns and making lived experience part of the conversation, not just the topic. You know, we are experts by experience. But you know what? And as I finish, the most important thing to change are these guys. My family. They've got their dad back. My wife's got her husband back. I got me back. Put your values first. Yeah, because your values will help you climb out of wherever you're feeling you are at the moment. And I'm going to stop sharing there because it will be over to Alison or Chiara, I would have thought, to take on the next bit. But I'm hoping some of you maybe learned a little something there. Maybe it pricked conscience or it made you curious. And the only thing I would recommend is have an open mind to this stuff, because, you know, I'm not saying everybody's life should change the way mine did. I don't expect you to ride across Britain. You know, one person's riding across Britain can be the next person's bedroom door or their front gate or their garden. You know, having those hopes, but those hopes are what are valuable to us. So I'm going to say thank you. And hopefully Alison or Chiara will jump back in and they'll be taking over from here.
Hi, Lee, thank you so much. I think it's so incredibly powerful to hear from you and from your story. And I know I'm not alone in finding, you know, what you've experienced and what you've overcome incredibly inspirational. So thank you for coming along this evening and sharing that with us. And you know, for the rest of this evening, what we're really hoping to do is just to pick up on a lot of those things that you've already mentioned, and it's particularly mentioning how they mattered to you and how they were a part of your journey and continue to be a part of your journey, because I know, as you said, there's not a kind of race and there's not, that kind of end destination. It's continuing to live day to day. So what we're doing is we're just reloading the slides, so that'll just take a moment or two. Okay, but really what I want to, what we're going to focus on just for the next wee while is again just coming over some of those things that Lee's already mentioned. Okay. Coming back to kind of what we mentioned initially about, different types of pain. As Dr. McTavish was saying, we do have this acute pain, this kind of short-lived pain where we know that there is tissue damage, and therefore there's very much a physical danger that your brain is picking up on. But that's a bit different when it comes to chronic or persistent pain, because a lot of the time any tissue damage that there's been has actually healed, and so therefore there's no ongoing physical danger. And so in that case, we have to ask ourselves, well, why is the brain creating pain when there's no tissue damage there? And coming back to what Lee was saying, there's different reasons that it's doing that. Okay, so one of the main reason is that it's picking up on a threat from somewhere. Okay, so that threat might not be a hot plate, but it is picking up that there is a threat somewhere, and it's trying very much to protect you from it. Okay, and I guess sometimes the brain can be a bit like an oversensitive car alarm or house alarm. We absolutely want that alarm to go off when someone is breaking into our car or breaking into our house, but we all know of alarms that go off at the slightest thing. So if it's a windy day, that's the car alarm going off, or if there's a spider wandering around your house, that might be setting off your house alarm, and that is an oversensitive alarm. And sometimes that's the mode that our brain gets into. It's just being a bit oversensitive, a bit overprotective. And the other thing that the brain sometimes picks up on, and the reason it produces pain, is because it's learned it over time. Okay, so the brain is an incredible learning machine, and sometimes what it can do is think back to things that have happened years, even decades before, and it's reactivating those brain pathways, those neural pathways that Lee mentioned, to produce pain. So you might already know the answer from what Lee said, but I just want everyone to spend just a moment thinking, in this chronic or persistent pain, if there's no physical threat, there's no injury or infection going on at that moment, then what threat might it be that your brain is sensing? So in this case, it's often sensing an emotional threat. Okay, so emotional threats can cover a whole lot of different things. So sometimes it can be a very obviously stressful situation, but there are other things as well that our brain still picks up on as a threat. And some of these include emotional and psychological stress. Now, a lot of people do live with psychological stress for a long period of time, and sometimes it gets to the point where you're so used to it that it doesn't even feel like you're stressed in the moment, but the brain is still sensing that there's something going on in the background. So sometimes even long-term stress can cause problems with pain. The other threats that the brain often picks up on include things like poor sleep. So I'm sure we can all, think about the difference between, having the best night's sleep ever and you wake up and things feel good, versus if you've had a very poor night's sleep, or for a lot of people had a long-standing problem with very poor sleep. She makes people feel quite physically unwell. So the brain is absolutely picking up on that being a threat as well. And again, that can contribute to pain. We also know that a poor diet over a long period of time can be picked up on as a threat, a lack of physical movement as well, and loneliness and lack of social connection too. These are all really powerful threats that the brain is very good at sensing. And again, coming back to what Lee was saying, there is scientific evidence that these neural pathways that are triggered in physical danger or physical threats are exactly the same ones that are triggered when we feel emotionally unsafe. And we've shown this on functional MRI scans. So basically these are quite complicated scans of the brain, and they show different brain areas lighting up and being active in certain situations. So that's how we know it's the same neural pathways that are being activated. So just kind of an example of what this looks like. So we've got two diagrams of brains on the left, okay? At the top, we've got a brain which has no background of pain, and at the bottom, we've got a brain which has chronic or persistent pain. And the different colours mean different levels of activity in the brain. So at the top there, you can see lots of blue areas. Those are areas of decreased activity. And you can see it's fairly evenly balanced with the red areas, which are areas of increased activity. So that's a nice balanced brain, bit of increased, bit of decreased activity, but overall everything's kind of in sync. Compare that to that brain at the bottom, so that's the chronic pain brain, and you see just how many areas are red, how many areas have got increased activity. There's no balance there. That is a stressed or a distressed brain. And what we need to do is to try and reduce some of that stress in order to reduce some of those pain signals that brain is producing and get the pain improved. So just to think about, why is the brain doing this? This sort of pyramid here shows what the brain's priorities are. So at the very bottom, the thing that underpins absolutely everything is the brain is trying to keep you alive. So at any moment in time, if your brain detects any threat to you, it's going to focus on that at the exclusion of everything else, because it just wants to focus on keeping you safe. So that means that, once it's satisfied that you're safe, it can start seeing and hearing things, it can feel things, at the very top of things, feeling very safe, thinking about learning new things. But fundamentally, once there's a threat, or it perceives that there's a threat to you, then it's very much going to focus on kind of trying to manage that. And in order to do this, the brain is desperately looking to try and keep you safe at any moment. And it does that by trying to predict what's going to happen. What we're going to show in some of the amazing pain stories that are coming up is that sometimes the brain doesn't get those predictions right. Okay, a lot of those predictions are based on things that have happened a long time ago, our memories, our past experiences, what we've learned, and often those are not actually applicable to what's happening right here and now. So sometimes the brain is making mistakes, and what we need to do is a lot of the time to teach them that they've got it wrong. It's thinking that there's a threat, but actually in this situation there isn't. And again, just linking back to what Lee's saying, I think a lot of people find it very difficult when the pain has been going on for such a long period of time. It's having such a huge impact in your life. It really is changing people. It can be very difficult to see that there's any point in that pain being there at all. But it's just to say at this stage that even when the pain is that long lasting and having such a big impact, it's doing it because it's just trying desperately to keep you safe. Okay, it's picked up on some sort of a threat, and it's just trying to protect you. And the trick is finding out, why has it come to this conclusion? So getting curious, as Lee was saying, about what might be going on in your brain. And I just want to share this short video with you, which just, I think, demonstrates some of the incredible power of the brain. So I think that video just demonstrates some of the incredible power of the brain to basically take what it thinks is happening, what it predicts is going to happen, what any of us would think would happen if someone took a hammer and hit us on the hand with it, and it creates pain even if there's no actual damage to people's real hand. And this is not the first time we've seen this, so there are lots of different experiments that have shown this. In one experiment, a group of volunteers put their head inside a fake electrical stimulator, and they were told that a powerful electrical current would be run through their head. And they reported that as the pain in their head increased when they were told that the intensity of the electrical current increased, even though at no point was any electrical current ever run through their head. And again, it relies very much on context and what we're expecting to happen. So we would expect something to hurt more if it's hot than if it's cold. That's just kind of how our brains are wired. And so what happened in this study was they did a kind of mildly painful pinprick to the back of someone's hand, and the intensity of the the pinprick didn't change over time, but when that pinprick was paired with a red light, the person felt it was more painful than when it was paired with a blue light, and that's because they felt that the red light represented heat and the blue light represented cold. So again, just that incredible power of the brain to kind of predict what it thinks is going to happen and produce what it thinks is the appropriate response to keep us safe. So just to kind of clarify what this looks like. So the brain decides whether something is painful or not 100% of the time, no exceptions. Okay, that's a decision that the brain makes based on what it thinks the threat level is and how it's keeping you safe. But it sometimes gets it wrong. And that means that pain isn't actually a very good detector of what's going on, but it's a very good protector. Okay. And that means really that if something is painful, it doesn't necessarily mean it's harming you, because it could be the brain picking up on some kind of other threat, not necessarily something that's physically harmful. And anything that makes our brain threatened is going to make that pain feel worse. And anything that makes our brains feel safe is going to make the pain feel better. So just to kind of demonstrate how this links in with fear, there's a very common vicious cycle that people get caught up in, where they feel pain, and understandably they're very concerned about that for lots of different reasons, particularly if doing something might mean that they're concerned that they might be damaging themselves more. That fear, we know, then increases the pain further, which in turn increases the fear. And so people are caught in this horrible cycle of moving between increasing pain and fear. So I just want you again just to think for a moment about some of the feelings and emotions that you might have when you think about your pain. So these are some of the things that people have said in the past, and some of these might be familiar to you. Fear is absolutely up there as a very real problem, and I know a lot of people do feel that very much. There's also a lot of other emotions there as well. You might feel hopelessness. Anger is a very common feeling stressed or depressed, feeling shame or guilt about feeling the pain, and often grief as well, particularly for things that you might not be able to do, for a different life in the past. And actually thinking about all of these emotions, they are absolutely on the fear side of that cycle. Okay, so when the pain comes on and you start to feel all of these emotions, these are all pretty negative emotions, I think we can agree. And what we find is that really all of these difficult emotions, alongside other stresses as well, like poor sleep and things like that, these are all fuel on the fire of the pain. However, if we can start to dial down that fear and those negative emotions about the pain, then actually we can start to dial down the pain itself. So a lot of the work done about pain management is reassuring our brains that they're safe. And just to kind of summarize some of the things that we've discussed so far this evening, just again wanting to reiterate what Dr. McTavish said, that the pain is absolutely real. Okay, just like when we saw in that video with the people getting their hand hit with the hammer, there is no doubt at all that those people were feeling pain. Okay, But we also know that pain can happen without tissue damage, and there's a lot of different things that can influence it. So our emotions, how we feel about the pain, or how we're feeling about other things that might be happening, our memories, what's happened in the past, also our thoughts and beliefs about the pain, they all have a really significant role to play in how the pain is experienced. And making the brain feel safe will help the pain to improve, so we can start to break out of that pain fear cycle. Our brains are incredibly powerful, okay? And they're also very good at learning new things. So we have this term called, that they're very plastic, and that just means that they respond eagerly to retraining and redirection, and really being curious and finding out new things about them. I know there's this saying that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but I just want to say that that is absolutely not the case when it comes to persistent pain. Okay, we can learn new things about pain and other things as well, but certainly about pain right up until we die. Okay, so no matter how long people have experienced the pain for, it is never too late to start looking into this. And learning about the brain, we can help to break down some of those problematic and sometimes actually very painful mental patterns. So if that brain is sensing danger, it's trying to keep us safe, and it's creating pain too easily as an oversensitive alarm, as it does in persistent pain, then we can look at retraining it. And that is very much what the focus is on of the pain management program. And I'm just going to hand over to Dr. Miftash in a moment to talk us through what that's going to look like. I do just want to say, for those of you who are not coming along to the pain management program or who are watching this recorded, we do also have a lot of information on our website. So if you go onto Douglas Medical Centre under the chronic pain section, a lot of what we've spoken about tonight is on there. There's a huge amount of information.